Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube and listening, if you're listening on the podcast, first of all, just you may have noticed, if you're watching especially, that I'm kind of in a different location today, and I haven't been able to post a interview in quite some time. We've had some family emergencies come up recently, and I'm actually a little bit displaced at the moment. I'm currently in Oklahoma, you from out here. So it's a little bit of a different setting, but still, I wanted to go ahead and do this interview today because I have a very special guest that I'm really excited to talk to. I've been trying to get him on for a while, and I've been watching his YouTube channel for a while. And I think what he brings up on his channel is very sound advice for just about anybody in any sort of collectibles trade. Let me just go ahead and introduce him. He is Shawn from Reserved Investments. Shawn, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, and let me just let you kind of explain your YouTube channel if you don't mind, because you can probably explain it a lot better than I can. If you can explain it, and if you can just sort of give a brief explanation as what made you decide to start doing YouTube
Absolutely.
content.
Well, my name is Sean. I live outside of Philadelphia in a small town called Boyertown where I grew up. And I started in the antiques and collectibles trade at the ripe age of 12 years old. I had a lot of key mentors that showed me how these markets work and operate from a financial perspective and also from a collecting, speculating, and even investing perspective. And the reason why that was possible is I live roughly 45 minutes away from Adamstown, Pennsylvania. If you Google Adamstown, Pennsylvania, you're going to see it's the antiques capital of the United States. We have so many flea markets, antique marts, auction houses, all nestled in this location from Philadelphia all the way up through Adamstown. It's an amazing place to learn the antiques and collectibles trade. And I just got lucky because I showed such an interest at such a young age that I met with the right people and they taught me the basics of a lot of these markets, from comic books to toys to sports cards to high-end ceramics to the art market, rare coins, artwork, anything you can imagine. Pretty much I had exposure to at a young age, and it benefited me highly. And one of the things that I discovered in my teachings with a lot of these high-profile individuals that either collected, dealt, or even invested in these objects is that there is a definite difference between how a collector views these markets versus that of a speculator versus that of an investor. And I soon realized, because I'm also educated in business economics and finance myself, I went to college for that. I learned that the people who are coming into these markets with a financial education already in tow, if they're willing to learn the antiques and collectibles trade, they're already prepared to benefit financially if they come in as an investor rather than a collector or speculator. And this was paramount in my teachings. So what happened was I got very lucky because I'm in my mid 40s. And what happened was in 1995, eBay came along. And I literally had just graduated high school in 1995. So to help put myself through college, I got involved in flipping items, going to yard sales, flea markets, antique marts, and I would sell them on eBay. And of course, I had mentors that would guide me along the way. And one of the interesting things that happened was I ended up making a lot of money during those particular time frames. And I was lucky because my mentors would tell me, this particular collectible, it doesn't have long-term collectability. Sell it in the market, let it go, and see what happens. This item over here, though, that I was getting into, they were like, well, this particular item has good long-term investment potential. So you should probably hold on to that. So I was able to pick up on all these tips and tricks on how to pretty much understand the dynamics of all of these changing markets. And back in the 1990s, it was Pez, Beanie Babies on the speculative side. Then, of course, you had sports cards, you had vintage toys, comic books, you had rare coins, all those markets coming into their own. So it was an interesting dichotomy. So as I went along, literally what happened is I knew at some point eBay, a lot of people were going to get involved, meaning the market was going to fundamentally change. So I started out a business that pretty much sold video games. It was actually called Electro Games. The eBay account still exists. And roughly right around 2008, I got sick and I would later be diagnosed with celiac disease. So I can't have gluten, but it was a very rough period there. And I ended up selling that business. And I started still doing eBay. I was doing it part time and I ended up writing guides on eBay. And writing those guides caused a lot of attention to be devoted to my work and how I analyze these markets. And that led to me writing for Antiques and Auction News, which I still write for to this day. My columns are published every 2 weeks in that particular publication. It's a well known publication in the antiques and collectibles trade, especially on the East Coast. So from there, I started getting emails from people that they need help analyzing these markets, or they just want to know my thoughts on certain items, certain collectibles, certain antiques, whatever it was. So from there, I went into consulting, and pretty much I started doing consulting part time, almost full time in 2015. And I'm still heavily involved in that. And even at that time, I said, I'm never ever going to go on YouTube because I saw a lot of people. I knew people going on YouTube. I had conversations with some of these guys. I remember Pat the NES Punk. I remember when Rudy with Alpha Investments launched his channel. And I said, I'm never going to do that. That's not me. That's totally not my style. Well, in 2019, I had a relationship that ended. And I wanted to keep my mind off of thinking of that particular relationship, the person that I was involved with. So I remember I came down here in my basement office and I just hooked up an iPhone and I filmed my first video. And I remember I uploaded it. It was not the best. I kept saying, okay, yeah, in the video. I mean, it was horrible, the presentation and all. But I got like 10 subscribers. And I thought, you know what, this channel is going to die a slow death. Let's be realistic. And people kept reaching out to me and go, hey, when are you going to upload new content? So there were people that were really interested in what I was saying. Now, what's interesting about my YouTube channel, Reserved Investments, is it's not a collectibles channel per se. It's a finance channel that talks about collectibles. And that's what rubs people sometimes the wrong way. Because I'm not always giving the advice on my particular YouTube channel that a collector wants to hear. It's more in tune with investors, that mentality that want to come into these markets and understand the financial dynamics of how these markets work. But what happened was, what kind of put me over the edge, because I didn't expect to get anywhere in this YouTube channel, graded video games started to become a thing, literally around 2017, 2018. Even 2019, they were really, really starting to trend upwards with the advent of a new grading company called Wada Games. And when I looked at that market and started studying it, I realized this is all speculation. And a lot of it, I have to use the word alleged here, but really I'm pretty confident to say it wasn't alleged, market manipulation behind the scenes with a lot of hardcore individuals that were involved in this market trying to prop up prices. And I called that out. And actually, as a result, this caught the attention of other key YouTubers like Pat the NES Punk, who was also calling that particular market out at the time, and also Carl Jokes. And they got together and they reached out to me and they said, hey, we're doing this video. We want you to be a part of it. And it was the video on Wada Games and the speculative nature of graded video games. And I was featured in that video. And that video got like over a million. I think it's somewhere near 1.5, 2 million views at present time. And as a result of that, that's really what put my channel on the map. Because at that particular point, people were reaching out to me, hey, this guy knows something. He knows his shit. Sorry, don't know if I can swear on this, but
Very good.
that's what they were saying. And they came to me and then they wanted me to do more videos, more videos. So I said, okay, I got to get into a rotation where at least I release content at least every week going forward. So that's pretty much how my YouTube channel took off. It was kind of accidental. There's a lot of people that claim it was too perfect and I planned this whole thing. It's like, no, it happened just organically, because even at this particular point, I only have like 14,500 subscribers, I think, at present time. So it's been
Yeah,
a long road, but
yeah, well, I feel like that's the way a lot of the best or the better YouTube channels out there. They didn't mean for it to happen, or it just kind of organically happened, and um, especially around this time frame, I think that more and more people just have gotten interested in learning more about these different types of collectibles since the pandemic, and so the big reason why I definitely wanted to talk with you is because so anyway, so I found your channel and I did watch that Car Jobst video as well because I find it interesting to look at the other collectibles markets and what's happening in those. And I think it's important for I think anyone that's thinking about being a whether you're a sports card collector or a comic book collector or a vintage video game collector to know what's happening in all the other collectibles markets because you see a lot of the same trends like you mentioned with market manipulation and speculation occurring. And of course, that ran rampant for pretty much all the collectibles market during COVID. So I think your channel, and there's a few other channels out there, sort of pointing out things of like what people should know from a financial perspective and investing perspective in these collectibles is really, really important going through these, especially these high peaks that all these collectibles markets saw during the pandemic.
Very much so.
And so, what you talk a lot on your channel about knowing the difference between what's truly an antique and something that has historical value as opposed to a collectible and things that are more nostalgic, and which is longer lasting, and why it's important to know the differences between those things. Could you kind of go over that?
Correct. Yes. An antique is something that's defined as 100 years of age or older. That's a simple definition of an antique. Antique markets in nature compared to collectibles. Now, the definition of a collectible is simply an item that sells for more than its original retail price. So you can open up a pack of brand new, still manufactured Pokemon cards. And if you get a card, you paid $5 for that pack, and you have a card in there that's worth 20 or 30 or $40. That's considered a collectible. That's all a collectible is. So these markets, they have similarities, but there's also distinct differences between them. Antique markets, because generally an antique is 100 years of age or older, those markets have a long track history. So those markets are more cyclical in nature, meaning an antique market can die out. Don't get me wrong. There's been markets that made it to the antique realm. They became popular and then they died out. That has happened. But overall, if we look at rare coins, if we look at the market for historical documents, even antique furniture, or even antique bottle collecting, those markets tend to go through boom and bust cycles, and they always come back. They always come back in the vogue. It's almost like the seasons. Collectible markets, by their nature, because they rely on nostalgia only, not real historical significance, those markets are more linear in nature. So at some point, what could happen is, like we've already seen this with certain, like if we look at Schwinn bicycles, Schwinn bicycles are not collected as much in the year 2023 as they were in the 1970s, 1980s. That's an example of a pop culture market that came out of the gate. It had organic collectability, but eventually it didn't gravitate or resonate with younger generations of collectors. So at some point, the market ran out of steam. And as a result, there ain't very many collectors left going after Schwinn bicycles. The same thing's going to happen with Lionel toy trains. How many kids do you know in the year 2023 that are asking for the latest Lionel toy train to be under their Christmas tree? It's very few, if any. And that's an issue for that market. Now, on the other end of that particular spectrum, when we talk about collectibles, you do have the collectibles, like if we talk about an Action Comics 1, Detective Comics 27, your first appearance of Batman, your first appearance of Superman. They debuted it right in the late 1930s. They're still going strong today. It is possible that at some point, another 20 years or so, they could cross over, become antiques, and still have that type of collectability where people still want to go after and pay a premium for those particular items. Which in most cases, I see that happening, especially with certain pre 1965 comic books. Where it gets complex is this is the mistake that a lot of collectors, speculators, and sometimes investors make. They assume that collectability is going to spill over and affect all comic books. And that's what was happening during the comic book speculative bubble of the 1990s. People assumed just because this stuff was being put out by all these publishers, like even DC, Marvel Comics at the time, with holofoil limited edition covers, they were relaunching series just to start with issue one so they could sell new issues of comics like Spider Man and the like. A lot of people thought, well, these particular items are going to have organic collectability. And that's not necessarily true. So there's various differences and similarities between antiques and collectibles, but overall, the antique market is more cyclical, and the collectibles market is more linear. Nostalgia at some point comes to an end. Let's be realistic. I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm in my mid 40s. I grew up with Masters of the Universe. I grew up with GI Joe, Transformers, Star Wars, of course. Out of that bucket of collecting categories that I just named, or I should say pop culture licenses, Star Wars is obviously the strongest. I don't see much hope for Masters of the Universe because every time they try to launch the line again, it ends up in the bargain bin. And the only people that buy it are people my age. So that's an example where if you're investing in that market and you're putting a lot of money in that market, at some point it's going to end.
Yeah, well, and what you were talking about with the comic books, I definitely feel like the exact same scenario has happened in sports cards several times. You know, when people start hearing about what Honus Wagner cards and Mickey Mantle cards are breaking all-time records in sales, and they think that that will translate across a lot of different types of sports cards, and they will go out and say them. And this happened in the '90s, obviously, and it's happening now since 2018, I would say, even though, and well, in this has had an effect on the market, and it's had an effect on, like, Luka Doncic rookie Prism cards and Zion Williamson Prism cards, even though there are, hundreds of thousands of them in existence. And what's happened is the companies that are producing these are noticing the market trends, obviously, and you keep having these sort of cyclical waves of manufactured booms on top of what's happening in the market. And so we're seeing print runs go up over the course of these last 4 or 5 years in sports cards, but we're also seeing that with other things too, like I know with Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, and that's been a bit of a controversy in those collectibles markets as well. Um, so you also talk a lot about knowing the difference between manufactured rarity and organic rarity. Why is that important to know the difference, and in particular with what's going on with the manufacturing processes of these collectibles lately?
Sure. Well, almost all of the collectibles or even antiques that you covet right now, most of them probably, I would say well over 90% have organic collectability. Let me just name two examples of what I already mentioned in a previous answer. Action Comics 1, Detective Comics 27. When they first premiered on newsstands, nobody was going to the newsstand going, "Oh my God, first appearance of Superman, first appearance of Batman. I got to put these away. We got to protect them, wrap them in plastic, keep them factory sealed and fresh from the newsstand. And in X number of years, they're going to finance our retirements or our college kids, our kids' college education." Nobody said that because back then comic books weren't really a thing. They weren't collected. As a result, today we know the power, or I would say the effect that Superman and Batman had on generations, not just one generation, generations of adults, kids, collectors, enthusiasts who love those comic characters and relate to the stories, the movies, the pop culture memorabilia that we see all about that features Superman and Batman. So it kind of makes sense when you look at the CGC census and realize there's only a handful of each graded that they would sell for the prices that they do. Now, today, in the year 2023, we have companies, especially in the comic book marketplace, among others, that are coming into these markets and they go, "Well, we're going to create a new comic book character, but we're going to limit the amount of copies we're going to publish. And we're also going to come out with either a limited edition cover, a gold holofoil cover. We're going to do something crazy with variant comic book covers." And the reason why manufacturers do this is because they already know comic books are a thing. So the average person that walks into a comic book store and sees that first appearance, they're going to go, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to buy this. If this character catches on, this is going to be worth money." So what happens is you walk into a comic book store now in the year 2023, you can buy the comic book on the newsstand, on the rack, and they have a bag and board that you could buy for 25 cents just to plop it in, seal it up, and you don't even read it. It just becomes a commodity. That's the difference between organic collectability and mass produced scarcity. Now, to use your example further with sports cards, with Magic the Gathering, with even Funko Pops, what these manufacturers are doing now, they're cutting supply down to the bare minimum. Either they're only making a handful of examples, or they're making one serialized card and they're putting it in a pack. And if you find that card, somebody just mystically will pay you 50, $60,000 for that card. It's insane. They've taken it to new heights. And unfortunately, if you look at the value of collectibles, true organic collectability is the main thing that drives the value on the secondary market, that and true organic demand. A lot of these mass produced collectibles that you're seeing put out by companies like the sports card manufacturers, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, Funko Pop, even Lego's doing this right now. A lot of those particular items They have a run up in price because the uneducated consumer assumes they're rare because they limited production, but in all actuality, they have very little organic collectability as a result. And that's what makes that market very risky if someone's trying to invest in those items long term.
Yeah, and you have to really be careful if you don't understand the limited limited edition in certain cases, like you said with comic books, and you see this also obviously with sports cards, where the manufacturers will put out one product of Prism basketball or Prism football, and they'll
Sure.
say, "Hey, you can really." But then you don't realize that, well, they've actually done this about 40 or 50 times because now the Prism cards have like 50 different short print, quote unquote short print parallels of one player. And you have like a 300 player set. So do the math. You already have like tens of thousands, quote unquote, limited edition cards of these players. Like the one of one thing used to actually be a true rare one of one when you pulled it from a pack in like the late '90s, early 2000s, and I think now there's like over 1,000 one of ones that you can pull of like some of the hot rookie players from products nowadays, and I think a lot of people, yeah, that got into this in 2020, 2021, trying to get lucky and invest in ripping wax or invest in getting in breaks, because getting into breaks was a big thing because people thought that that was the best way to probably get one of these rare cards. But those cards haven't stood the test of time, even all the way just a couple years later. Now in 2023, you see the values of those things plummeting because they aren't actually organically rare, and organically the people are not organically going after those.
Correct.
And I know that the same thing is kind of happening in things like graded video games, because I think people are not understanding what's actually rare in a lot of those instances, even though, they think that, oh, a graded sealed copy of Super Mario 64, even the pop report is like less than 20, so it's got to be rare, but it really actually isn't that rare, and the collectability of that has significantly gone down, as well as what looks like a lot of the graded seal video games that just went up like crazy back in 2021, 2022,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah. Pretty much that market pretty much crashed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say there isn't opportunity there because video games are organic collectibles. Let's be realistic. There is a lot of demand for those particular items. It's not like Beanie Babies or Funko Pops, although the market dynamics right now, because they're all speculative, are similar. But overall, video games at least have organic collectability. The problem was prices shot up so quick that everybody expected them, unfortunately, to keep going higher. And a lot of us, myself included, Pat the NES Punk, a couple of other people in that space said that's not possible. They're shooting up too quickly in price. There's something going on behind the scenes. And when you scratch the surface, you saw there were a lot of people coming into these markets that weren't really collectors. They just saw, oh, great at video games. They're in short supply. If I buy them, they're going to go to the moon and I can make money on it. And that is the problem. That's why usually I tell people when you see individuals setting up LLCs to simply invest in collectibles, that's not a market that is safe to get into for the average person.
Yeah, and once again, I think a lot of people assuming they know, like I think we saw this a lot with COVID, where people are into one particular collectible, like sneakers. They think
Yes.
because they've been collecting sneakers for many years and they can get into sports cards or sports memorabilia, and they think because they've done so well in sneaker collecting, that will translate into the other collectible, and I don't think that's often the case, right?
Well, I agree with you 100%. Yeah, different markets have, we call it in the trade a barrier to entry, right? I mean, if
Mhm.
you want to go to Walmart, Target, even Best Buy, wherever Pokemon cards are sold, you can buy a pack of Pokemon cards and you can call yourself a collector. You can even, if you want, call yourself an investor. But the problem is the barrier to that market, the entry, is very low. Now, if you wanted to do that same thing with rare coins or even certain vintage comic books, your barrier to entry would be much higher because there's more of a learning curve to get into those markets. You're not just paying $5 for an item now. you're most likely paying a lot more, and you have to learn the fundamentals of that market and also understand the risk versus reward scenario. And unfortunately, in the year 2023, everybody thinks that they're going to make easy money. That's what's driving all of this. That's why people are coming into these markets, whether it's Lego investing, whatever it is. They see this as a panacea of easy money, and it's not.